This show is sponsored by levities.co, raw, edgy, and humorless apparel. Remember, you don't have to agree with them. You have that right. Welcome to Mind Matters, and thank you for joining Dan Ploger and myself, John Krotek. This podcast is where we discuss the critical social, economic, and spiritual issues that affect all of us. We, the people, are in a battle against the forces of entropy, forces that are hell-bent on gaining power for personal reasons, forces hell-bent on destroying the concepts of freedom and individual thought, forces which don't benefit the social order. Thank you again. Good morning, Dan. How's it going?
Going good, John.
Good to see you. You know, as usual, I know you're down in Florida and you had to turn your thermostat on. It got down to 70 and, you know, you're a warm-blooded guy now.
Yeah. It just doesn't, cold weather just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, we've got an interesting subject today that a lot of people have been talking about. I'm sure that most of the listeners by now have heard that Donald J. Trump has thrown his hat into the ring. He's in it again for 2024 to run for the president of the United States of America again. And more of this phenomenon that they've been calling Trump derangement syndrome has taken the world by storm again. I mean, it's like every time that man shows his face, a group of people just blow up. But you know, it's kind of funny really to watch. But before we get started, I want to read a couple of definitions of what this Trump derangement syndrome is, and then Dan, and you know, with respect to entropy and you know human behavior, let's see if we can just unravel it again, pull it apart, see what it really is all about. I've got two definitions. One of them is a classic definition, and the other one is found in the I don't know, out on the street, I guess you will. You know, it's the proverbial societal definition. But you know, Trump derangement syndrome. The description on Google is this: Trump derangement syndrome is a term usually for criticism or negative reactions to former United States President Donald Trump that are perceived to be irrational and presumed to have little regard towards Trump's actual policy positions or actions undertaken by his administration. Okay.
That was generous.
Pretty generous from Google. And then here's what we're getting from the cultural definition. Trump derangement syndrome. A talking point intended to dismiss the majority of Americans, okay, the majority of Americans, and we'll talk about that, who understand that Donald Trump is unfit to manage a McDonald's as crazy. Generally unsuccessful, as supporting Donald Trump makes it clear that you're just about the dumbest human being imaginable. That sounds to me like whoever wrote that definition is suffering from exactly what he's demonizing.
Afflicted them, yes. They're afflicted them.
So let's just think about this with respect to the first definition, which was very generous, like you pointed out. The policies that Donald Trump, when he was the president, 45th, we had low inflation in America. We had low fuel prices. We had low food prices. We had a controlled, if not totally closed border. We had low crime. Okay. I don't know why that would make anybody go crazy, but you'd think that any kind of syndrome would have to be positive, not a derangement syndrome. And then let's talk about this, the majority of Americans. Okay, so if you go to the 2020 election, you have 74 plus million people, almost 274,222,958 approximately. Okay, that's a lot of people. Now, if you believe the next number, which Joe Biden got, but he got 81,283,098 votes, right? So you've got 7,000 or so. I don't, or 7 million. I'm not sure if the majority that they talk about, if that's not a flim flam job or not, because 71 million people is a lot of people, or 73, whatever it was. And so it would seem to me that that definition demonizes half of America at the least, and which to me is a Soviet propaganda tactic and or a socialist propaganda tactic. So all of that being said, Dan, start out with this. Let's unpack that a little bit with your wisdom.
Oh, okay. The Google definition, read that again.
Okay, let me pop that up
So
here
we can.
again. Okay, hold on here 1 second. Um, the Google definition is, I just had that here. I'm going to have to go through. The Google definition is Trump derangement syndrome is a term usually for criticism or negative reactions to former United States President Donald Trump that are perceived to be irrational and presumed to have little regard towards Trump's actual policy positions or actions undertaken by his administration, which led to all of those very positive things we just mentioned.
Well,
Take that. I mean, what's that mean to you?
well, it sounds. I mean, I'm surprised something like that came out of Google, but it seems to be fairly objective in its statement that it's a reaction to perceived shortcomings of the Trump administration. And but I don't know what those shortcomings might be. I can think of a lot of shortcomings with Trump the person, but his policies were policies that I think were objective and made a lot of sense. So people who, well, one thing I noticed, I should back up a little bit, is that the Trump derangement syndrome was a term that was tongue in cheek or sarcastically brought about by the Republicans themselves that were attempting to put a crazy label on those that opposed him. So right away is when we think about objectivity in discussing anything, I'm not sure how much objectivity there was there. I can understand in the colloquial definition you just read seemed to have very little bearing on reality from my perspective. I look back on what were some of the policies that were so offensive, and I have difficulty pointing out Trump policies that were that fell short of noble goals. Really, I think securing the border is certainly a goal that is not only rational but is necessary if you're going to call yourself a nation. If one of the key elements of what determines a nation is among common culture and these common language is
Closed borders.
is how do you
Yeah.
have a country if you don't have a border? How do you define the country? So that aspect of it seemed to be, of, Trump derangement syndrome, seemed to be one that was very pro-globalist and one that was very anti-national. And it's great for the elites to say that we need to cut down on our nationalism and blind patriotism. That's something that
that, but that
you're a
being,
globalist is not something that you would that you would want is nations that define themselves. But it seems the problem that I saw with that whole aspect of the argument is we're not talking about our enemies, nationalities or borders. In fact, the whole Ukraine fiasco that we're involved in now, which was to defend borders of Ukraine. Well, why are their borders more important than our borders?
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and an interesting perspective about where the term came from, anyways. Which completely blows the model of objectivity to smithereens, and then we get into labeling. But I think something that you're hitting on here, and it just dawned on me when you mentioned globalism versus nationalism. Well, in America, what separates us from all of those other countries that the globalists embrace is that we have a system here that allows men and women and the citizenry to enjoy the fruits of sacrifice and have freedom and liberty and God-given rights. And that's what separates the way our government and nation is set up culturally as compared to all others. And so the globalists embrace this world concept of one world government, one world financial system, and all of this. And to me, quite honestly, it's far-fetched, because we've seen what happens when we go democracy building and we allow countries to embrace freedom, and then they eventually just fall into anarchy, which what we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia right now. Is here's Ukraine that embraced freedom, even though they kept the corrupt system going. And then another corrupt system, it's like two thugs duking it out. So there's a failure of the globalist mindset that somehow we're all going to just get along. I mean, there's so much at play there, and it's not as simplistic as the World Economic Forum or George Soros or whoever else is involved. It's not so easy. It's great for them because they fund stuff that creates division, which makes them money. In fact, Soros made most of his money on hedging the value of currency in countries. He made a lot of money doing that, destabilizing countries. And all you have to do is do the research. Don't take my word for it. But, so here you have this group of globalist elites trying to tell the rest of the world how it's got to be. And in America, I'm not sure if it's going to fly. Certainly, we're under some constraints, but I don't know. I just don't see it. And I think Trump derangement syndrome actually is a manifestation of unobjectivity, and it is labelist, and it's a demonization. So it's actually coming from both sides, as you point out.
Right. I don't know. It's not a flattering term by any means. It suggests that the people are irrational in their distaste for Trump and everything he stood for. But I guess when I look back on Trump's performance over his 4 years, I saw improved economy. I saw everybody benefiting. I don't see that it created victims. I see things like the Abraham Accords, which were absolutely in another time and age. Just 4 years earlier would have been heralded as a really wonderful breakthrough in trying to achieve world peace. It kind of destroyed this idea that all Muslims or Muslim type countries are enemies. So I really, the whole thing I find mystifying, but I'm not sure that anything positive is evolves as a result of calling your opponents, suggesting they have some sort of a mental illness or a defective objectivity. But nonetheless, there it is. And that's fine. I don't. Again, I don't see. I don't see a whole lot of advantage in using the term. It is something that was easily thrust upon the Democrats by the Republicans as a as a as a slam, and so there you have it. Is there such a thing? Well, I think that a lot of people do come unglued and deranged at the mere thought of Trump again being president of the nation. So the whole thing I find a little mystifying, John. What is it that we hope to gain by calling your enemies, political enemies, that there's some defect? These things have not proven to be good criticisms. Fetterman, I guess, is a perfect example in Pennsylvania. That the Democrats raised and elevated an incompetent, and this is not just incompetent meaning lacking the ability of basic human skills like communication. And it just, that whole elevating Fetterman to the pinnacle of victimhood, I guess, is something I don't admire. I think that that people fall for giving favored preference to people based on how they've been victimized is not a noble human effort.
It lacks logic and reason and common sense, some things that we talk about all the time. And I'm thinking about the whole concept of Trump derangement syndrome and the cure. What would be the cure for something like that? Hypothetically, I would say the first thing would be to do is just stop the labeling, just with each other, quit demonizing your adversaries. Look for some kind of common ground or something that you can build on, not something that you destroy or
Right.
that you destroy with. And that seems to be, it seems to magnify the intolerance and the demonization when we don't take time to take a deep breath, to put the critical thinking cap on, and to use logic and reason to really figure out or to make a determination or to take a position that's based on those sound principles. And it almost seems like what we've witnessed the last couple of years is freedoms being taken under the guise of free speech or whatever, the right to assemble, and then somehow using those things actually against us. Like with the riots, that wasn't social equity, what we witnessed, with all the BLM riots. That was abusing the right to assemble and to become rioters. So that's, there's a lot here to unpack. I think that the TDS is just a manifestation of some deeper seated issues going on, and then some common practices. We know, most people know, if they look at it, that whenever you demonize your adversary or those who don't agree with you or don't hold your viewpoint, you split or you divide you deunify, it just isn't healthy for either side, wherever the term came from. And you brought that out, or acting out of control and being intolerant, neither one of those is going to help any country to be sustainable. And it's really, it's just, we talk about a lot of interesting subjects on Mind Matters, but, I would say that TDS does exist, but it's less of what it's being called and just more of intolerance. So on one side, you have name callers, and on the other side, you have victims.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, insinuating or pointing the finger and saying that those who don't agree with you are somehow deranged is not the methodology to build consensus.
It's not a unifying message.
It's crazy. And so I don't know. I shake my head at some of the things that I've witnessed the last couple of years, and it's like stuff playing out in real time that we've only read about in our political science books, the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, I think that this is an unfortunate term, and an unfortunate, it's actually playing into the hands of the collectivists and not those that believe in the sanctity of the individual that the United States Constitution professes. So yes, calling your political opponents defective mentally, it's probably something I just soon see, a term I'd see go away. And going back to the original take on this, is what policies were there that caused people to become deranged? I don't think it was about policy. I think it was about personality. And we've had discussions already on, your leadership. You don't hire a leader, which means vote for a person for president, if he's going to be divisive, or I wouldn't anyway. But I don't see where Trump's policies actually led to a great harm. All I've heard was platitudes in this most recent election, is platitudes about how how Trump was a threat to democracy, that democracy is on the ballot. Well, that doesn't even make sense.
It's ridiculous. You make me think of something, because it's true. So on one hand, you have some of the Republicans talking and pointing fingers and claiming people have Trump derangement syndrome. But then on the other hand, you have the other side pointing the fingers and somehow saying that people that believe in the Constitution and democracy somehow don't believe in democracy, and somehow they're fascists. And so, my gosh, is just not the most ridiculous thing. And you know what, Dan? You hit it, brother. It plays right into the hands of the collectivists, because it's dividing a nation. And we all heard, a nation divided won't stand. A deck of cards won't stand, and whatever it is. And that's what's going on here. That's the deeper subject, or the deeper meaning of the Trump derangement system. It's a division tool. Just like MAGA calling somebody a fascist, it's a division tool.
Yes.
Now, I don't know. It's like, and then you could take the Trump administration. We can point out all the good things that were under that administration, and then take the current administration, and we can look at the 40-year plus high of inflation, a border that's porous, drugs flowing in at a phenomenal rate, high food prices, high fuel prices, just writing the ticket, but writing, just printing money like a drunken sailor. And anybody in business knows that you can't do that. So I would say that the criticisms of this administration bear more merit than anybody who they claim is suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. I think it's deeper than that. I think that we've got collectivism manifested in a divided citizenry, and it's not good. We need leadership more than ever right now.
And not divisional leadership, but unifying leadership. But ever since Obama, divisional leadership has been favored. That's what Obama stood for, in my mind, was breaking people into groups and then identifying, casting upon the people within those groups certain beliefs that they may or may not hold true. And I don't,
Well, it's even like Obama's policies. They were neither Democratic nor Republican. So think about that for a second. If you espouse or if you support narratives that are not democratic historically or by definition, or not Republican by definition, which was born out of the early Greek systems, Greek governments. So what does that leave? That leaves socialism viewpoints or communist viewpoints, which equals, in our minds, my mind anyways, a globalist collectivist point of view. So America and our Constitution is an anathema to those people who are creating division by either accusing somebody of being a MAGA fascist or accusing somebody of having Trump derangement syndrome. So that being said, I would just say to anybody listening that has an open mind and is wearing the critical thinking skull cap, I would say stay alert, stay alive, use some common sense. Don't be a victim and don't blame people. Don't say to those who don't agree with your narrative or belief that they're somehow deranged. And don't say that somebody's a fascist if they don't agree with your policy or your narrative either. I mean, that is common sense.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, is that what is a fascist? There's no commonly accepted agreement on that. Just like there's no common agreement on what's democratic, what's a democracy. As long as we've got voting and voting that we can rely on, I think that we still follow in the democratic principles, understanding the distinction between a republic and a democracy. Thank God our forefathers had the foresight to be able to see the potential for tyranny of the masses. And the whole Constitution was set up to protect individual rights against forces that would take those rights away.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where we're at. So the question is, does Trump derangement syndrome exist? I would say no. I would say it's more intolerance created by finger pointing. And same thing, MAGA fascists. Come on, President Biden, you can do better than that. And come on, or can he? And come on, pointing fingers and accusing people of some kind of mental derangement because they've become intolerant, or it's just something we need to think about. Unity is what we need.
Exactly. And this idea of that we needed to win 50 Senate seats, you got to look behind that, how important that was to win 50 seats. We're not talking about 50 diplomatic and enlightened leaders. We're talking about 50 seats. Fetterman, it doesn't matter that he doesn't have the ability or may not have the ability. I don't know. I'm not his physician, but to distinguish and think critically, it's the fact that it represents a seat. It just represents a vote, and it's assumed that that vote will go along with the party from which they originate. This was before Trump. This wasn't a thing. You still knew you had the Joe Manchins that would on occasion, depending on the issue at hand, that they would had the ability to think independently and to vote independently. But now it's just a given that if you belong to a party, you're going to vote in line in lockstep with the party. And this is not pro-democratic. This is not pro-American. This is the antithesis of that. And we just need to be cautious that we don't fall into the same trap and into the same tactics that our enemies are using, our political enemies. These aren't real enemies. These are Americans. And if we could identify common American goals, then maybe we realize that we're more the same than we are different. But this is where a unifier of leaders, a unifier amongst our leaders is so important. And unfortunately, I don't see that Trump's running again is going to do anything but exacerbate that situation. Whose fault that might be? Is that Trump's fault for being such I don't know, an unwelcomed personality, I guess is one way to say it. It's to make fun and name call. That's not something that I think our nation particularly needs at this point. I would love to see somebody who doesn't come out as a Republican, but as an American candidate.
I love that, and you're so right. So, and it's whenever there's power, money, and control involved at the highest levels, or at any levels in government, there's always going to be chicanery afoot. And you hit the nail on the head. We need to seek and find common American goals. We need leaders who are strong. We need leaders who unify. We need leaders who stop labeling, which you just pointed out, the name calling by Donald Trump. And we need leaders who can find common ground with those that don't agree necessarily with their policies or goals. And we need to exercise our freedom and not squash the vote or manipulate the vote or squash free speech or manipulate free speech or squash the things that were laid down in our Constitution by men and the women who supported them for something better than where they came from, which was tyranny and the monarchy. So any final thoughts, Dan?
Well, if our nation is as bad as as people think it is, I don't know why we have 5.5 million people seeking refuge in our country. I know why, because I've lived around the world and I've learned other cultures. And when you offer somebody the ability to get ahead based upon own initiative, this is a good thing. It appeals to the rest of the world because that's not available in Russia, or it's not available in China or Venezuela. They're just, and this is why we still have appeal. And I guess my hope is that there's nothing Dan Ploger can do to stop the flow of illegal immigrants to our southern border. But I can say, in most cases, I welcome the attitude of those peoples that they're bringing forward. I see the person that takes care of our house maintenance is somebody who's he has at least $150,000 worth of equipment and capital that he's put together himself based upon his own work. And I think that these people, or this attitude, is what made America great. And it's not being a member of the Republican Party or wearing a red baseball cap doesn't make you great. It's what's in your heart. And what's in your heart is individual freedom and individual meritocracy, not something based upon how you were born giving you your authority, like Meghan Markle. But
that's another episode.
that's another
The
episode.
royal family.
The royal victims.
Yeah.
But I like what I see, and I know that human nature likes meritocracy. And I think this is why the Democratic Party is losing Hispanic votes, because they don't want to be classified as a groupthink, a unified body that can be manipulated as a group, not as individuals. So I think that we have to continue to respect the principles of our Constitution, the principle of freedom of speech, the right to insult anybody they want to at any time they want. I think that's fine. And I think that we need that those things have to be protected, and to be shamed by a political movement, shamed out of your individual thought, and shamed into belonging to a group that you've been assigned to is foolish. Because what group do you belong to? I don't know, John, but other than being a white guy, I belong to about 10 different groups. I'm a libertarian in my beliefs. I'm a veteran, believing in that there was honor in what I did when I served. That there is that strength comes from unity and not division. These are things that I think most Americans believe in, but we've allowed this political charade, or whatever, the theater that we've seen over the last, I'll say, since Obama,
Yeah.
as something just has to go. I don't know why we can't get somebody in our leadership position that is a strong leader, and also it would be nice if they were a likable leader, but that's not something that's necessary. General Patton was not a likable person.
No, but he got the job
leader.
done. Yeah.
He got the job done. So
Yeah.
we all have different roles and different, depending on the context of our lives. But I think if we just hold true to the basic principles that we're more Americans than we are Democrats and Republicans, and that we do not support collectivist ideals that lump us into groups that we don't belong to, or that we only have a marginal participation in. I'm a libertarian, but I don't vote libertarian very often, because I know that under the two-party system, that's a wasted vote. So
Yeah. Some great.
I'm a member of 26 different groups.
I'm probably, in the same category there. I don't even know. And I look in the mirror, and I sometimes I wonder who that guy is. But the reality is those are some great points. And you said it so succinctly. Something has to go, like the labeling, the intolerance, the lack of unification, the lack of collaboration. Those things have got to go. We have got to stop the labeling. We've got to start the collaboration, and we've got to realize that our mind matters. And that's the freedom that God gave us, to be able to make rational decisions based on the information and the knowledge that we've gained as we've lived through entropy. And that's a whole other story. And, we're going to get there someday too. So, Dan, I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate all the listeners that are still with us. And all I can say is I enjoy talking with you, and I definitely love America. And
Well, thanks.
I don't accuse anybody of having any kind of derangement, and I don't call anybody a fascist. Let's get real here. But I can tell you this: I am for the individual. Appreciate you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Mind Matters. Use your critical thinking. use logic and reason. Make your own determinations on the critical issues. Stay alert, stay alive.